Thank you, Lerny. Welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our Bermuda Triangle deep dive series. There's always little tweaks to do here and there, especially when I take some time off. Thank you. So yeah, today we are continuing our deep dive series. We're going to be reading chapter 8 today, and we'll wait a moment here just to make sure everything's good. Awesome. Thank you, Lerny. That would have been bad doing this. I'd probably figure it out halfway through or something. But thank you for catching it. So Tuesday I had the Coral Castle deep dive series. We got further along with that. Next week we'll be reading the Edleed Skolnich chapter of the Bruce Cathy book. And I scheduled both the Coral Castle deep dive series and this Bermuda Triangle deep dive series to continue through the new year. So I have every week practically scheduled to have these shows. Actually, I mapped out the book that comes after this one. I mapped it out, so I have it all listed as upcoming shows. It actually, it's a minor problem here in OBS because I have too many live shows booked now. I can't scroll through down, but like I'm still able to see the chat here. So this whole select the stream thing on OBS doesn't matter. Alright, let's get started, shall we? As always, we'll be having the Illuminati at our side here. Be sure to like this video. I appreciate y'all being here, but help me with the algorithms a little bit. Alright, we're gonna get started. There we go. Okay. Chapter 8. I want to say it's pronounced Atyantica. Or is it Atyantica? I'm not too sure. Okay, it's a cool 20 pages here today. So get comfy, and we shall begin. Chapter 8. Atyantica. Several of the most dedicated searchers for Atlantis have agreed that Plato's tale is derived only from bits and pieces from what might be termed one vantage point of a much broader upheaval. It is also apparent to any observer of history that there exist far older tales of cataclysmic upheaval, destroying a vast prehistoric civilization at its zenith, that possess this same quality, though they are without any direct reference to the Atlantic. But when the Atlantic-centric theme of Atlantis, or rather Atyantica, is taken into account, a remarkable ingredient is added that all too ably explains otherwise mysterious elements credited for their various destructions. For example, in our Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions, we know that Babalu, or Babel, preceded the dawn of our own histories and was destroyed by scattering and division, so that its towers and buildings came crashing down. In India, the civilization is known as Rutas, destroyed by an earthquake, quote, before the Himalayas existed, end quote. Another echo of a time before great continental movement, since the catalyst of orogeny, or mountain building, is buckling land in response to the whole continent moving. The Chinese recall the world destruction of Mu, spelled M-U, by being overwhelmed by tidal waves and inundation. In Peru, the inhabitants of this civilization who survived were called Viracochas. This is spelled Viracochas, quote, sea foam, end quote, and by extension, quote, stormy sea, end quote, because they arrived in Peru at a time of unparalleled oceanic upheavals in order to build the first great city, Tiahuanaco. Taking the above as caused by one event, one can view these as stages of destruction of the same civilization, yet from different vantage points on what was a single continent. The cities at the epicenter of the cataclysm on both sides of the Atlantic were destroyed quickly, so entire populations were forced to relocate. Powerful earthquakes tumbled down cities on what are now the plains of Mesopotamia. The great uplifting mountains, where the continental strata buckled, uprooted cities in India, cities along the eastern coast of this mega continent, present-day China, were overwhelmed by tidal waves as the Euro-Asian continent slammed forward into the Pacific, with tidal waves crashing over Peru for the same reasons. The crucial instigating factor within these tales, destruction caused by God or the gods, might be given startling scientific body from an unusual source. Harold Wilkins, in his Mysteries of Ancient South America, notes many Aboriginal Indian legends that were originally recorded by the first Spanish and Portuguese explorers. All these distinctly recall 4 successive impacts, and that the sun and moon turned various shades of yellow, red, and blue. These atmospheric changes, if taken in the context of the continents ripping apart, could easily be explained by the massive amount of methane gas entering the atmosphere from the Atlantic seabed. This incredible incident was followed by another disturbing visual observation. Toward the east, in other words, where the Atlantic is now, darkness rose up from the earth to the sky, a memory perhaps recalling the horrific furnace with billowing plumes of smoke that would have belched out of the mid-Atlantic ridge as the earth split open. I'm taking a note here real quick. Alright, continuing on. Somehow the idea of just such a bombardment of comets, or meteors, and the destruction of a prehistoric civilization was recalled even by the Old World's most ancient cultures. As the following excerpt from Plato indicates, it was an event so old, the Greeks, relative newcomers to civilization, had preserved it in myth, but that more ancient cultures like Egypt preserved it with startling scientific regard. We again go back to his Timaeus dialogue and the story of, I'm going to say this wrong, Solon of Athens, journeying to Egypt in search of ancient knowledge. During his conversation with the priest of the Delta City, Osiris, Solon tries to figure out when the great deluge hit the earth, but the priest curtly interrupts him. So then we have a little excerpt from that story here. "O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." Solon in return asks him what he meant. "I meant to say that in mind you are all young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition." And then in brackets it says, "Bear in mind the priest was speaking 2,400 years ago." And brackets. "Nor any science which is hoary with age." That's spelled Hoary. "And I will tell you why. There have been, and will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. There is a story, which even you have preserved, that once upon a time Phaethon, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds of his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the heavenly bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and in great conflagration upon the earth." That's the end of the excerpt. This myth seems startlingly to embody the relationship as noted visually between Helios, the sun, and a comet, a small version of the sun, from the moment it entered the Earth's atmosphere, the thunderbolt being its explosion in the atmosphere. This exact chain of events was witnessed over Siberia on June 30th, 1908, when a bright burning pillar traveled slowly through the sky and exploded about 5 miles above the surface of barren forests near an area called Tunguska. This is almost unanimously believed today to have been a small comet, perhaps a short-lived comet, Encke. It's spelled Encke. It laid waste more than 700 square miles of forest, started flash fires, and felled trees in a neat domino effect as far as 12 miles from its epicenter. Placing these events in an obvious chronological order, the cause of the great splitting apart of the megacontinent and the destruction of a vast single civilization by confusion and scattering, by the gods or from above, seem to be explained by massive impacts of meteors, comets, or asteroids. Developing this further, one could assume that such a great force might have shaken the Earth literally to its core, so that the crust cracked, and the mantle poured forth to uplift and split this supercontinent. An idea of the extent of this widespread destruction can be appreciated by the fact that no known great meteorite impacts can be located anywhere near Greece or Egypt, nor is there evidence of an impact causing a, quote, great conflagration upon the earth, end quote, in the histories of adjacent civilizations. But as the Egyptian priest said, according to Plato, such an event may have been so long before and possibly so far away that many peoples, like the Greeks, regarded it only as myth. Older cultures, however, may have preserved the memory factually as a holdover from a prehistoric civilization that directly experienced its results. Abundant evidence has come to light in the last 25 years, however, to support the proposition that areas now encompassing the Bermuda Triangle and the Caribbean have been the epicenter of catastrophic comet or meteor impacts that ignited forests around the globe. This evidence includes stissovites, which are shock-heated grains of quartz, more numerous in the Caribbean than anywhere else on Earth. They have so far only been found at meteorite impact sites and nuclear explosion testbeds, where the massive explosions sent shockwaves passing through the rock at such force they shock-heated and compressed mineral grains of normal quartz. One piece of evidence may even establish titanic movement of the American continent in the wake of this impact. Tempestites, or deposits left by tsunamis, which are huge tidal waves, have been identified in Mexico, the southeastern United States, and the Caribbean on a colossal average. One consisted of a 150 to 300 foot band and a mixture of both big and small rocks, indicating that a violent and tremendous tidal wave ripped through what is now the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico in the wake of something definitely earth-shaking. This apparently happened even before the, quote, dust settled, end quote. On top of the tsunami deposit, a layer of iridium-rich silt had settled, and apparently had settled over almost the entire globe, if recent studies are to be embraced. A trace metal, iridium seeks the presence of iron and is therefore an extremely rare terrestrial metal, but one that is more common in the mantle and presumably in the core, where the greatest deposits of iron are thought to exist. It is located today in some, quote, hot, unquote, volcanoes, such as those in Hawaii, where it comes up from the mantle in the lava flows, but it is also associated with identified iron meteorite impact sites. This worldwide layer usually measures 2 to 3 centimeters thick, but in the Caribbean and Haiti, it is as much as 17 centimeters thick, with the iridium content being much higher than elsewhere, on an average of 10 to 50 times more. This iridium layer contains several, quote, peaks, end quote. That is, periods of greater concentration around the globe. A possible explanation for this is that early peaks were caused by the varying impacts of iron meteorites, and then later ones were caused by successive volcanic eruptions as the Earth was jolted, and great eruptions sent more iridium into the atmosphere at varying intervals based on the duration and timing of the flows, such as those seen at the Columbian Plateau or the Deccan Traps. These flows, a world apart, would seem to be impossible events without the continents undergoing massive upheaval and upsetting the mantle below. Widespread forest fires at this time seemed to have sent soot around the world, since this global iridium layer is found intermixed with carbon ash. But once again, it is thickest in the Caribbean, again indicating that this area was near the primary epicenter. Attempts to correlate the evidence above with an impact site have centered around the so-called subsediment Chicxulub crater in the Yucatan. And I'll spell that word for you. It is Chicxulub. Geologist Walter Alvarez was the first to propose this back in 1980. Using uniformitarian methodology, he dated the crater to 65 million years ago, even suggesting that the impact wiped out the dinosaurs. Recently, however, as that paradigm and its dating methodology have fallen apart, and as further tests indicate Chicxulub is not an impact crater, the search for impact sites has centered on the ocean bottom. Crater hunter Rufus Johnson has been able to pinpoint a chain of possible comet impacts along the Bermuda Triangle's continental shelf, with a minimum estimated age of 6,000 years. They extend out from Virginia and then following the coastline down to Florida, where possibly one of the largest in this shower might have hit. Although the craters are by now so weathered by the elements and the ocean that identifying them is highly subjective. Johnson continues to discover other evidence of massive impacts in this general area, like smooth and round river rocks in the middle of fields far from any river, some of them weighing up to 32,000 pounds. He observes, quote, "Yet these boulders are scattered around on the ground as if some unseen giant just casually tossed them aside," end quote. While the lead of this theory seems at first glance more suited to explain only the colossal ruins on the various sunken plateaus of the Bermuda Triangle, it may have more direct bearing on explaining its infamous enigma if we more thoroughly explore aspects of its legendary destruction. If we assume that these are the impact sites heard by the ancient peoples of the Americas, a rather interesting correlation with the enigma of the Bermuda Triangle is uncovered. In commenting on the Tunguska impact's after effects, Dr. I. Vasiliev, who contributed significantly to its study, reported that there had been, quote, "absolute electromagnetic chaos at the center of the site," end quote. He continued, quote, "There was clearly an electromagnetic hurricane of enormous proportions which had shattered, perhaps permanently, all the normal alignments with the Earth's magnetic field," end quote. A coincidence that adds another dimension to the origin of electromagnetic anomalies in the triangle. Unlike a meteor or an asteroid, a comet has a coma, or head, that is a vast reactor of energy. The damage done by several comets, measuring hundreds of miles in diameter, might have distorted the magnetic field enough so that even today, triggered by current changes, weather, or perhaps even the presence of a plane or ship, anomalies will spontaneously swirl into and out of existence. One may justifiably ask, however, if this is not going too far in trying to pin down a source for electromagnetic anomalies in the triangle and the connection between them and unidentified underwater ruins. Yet we may also ask, how did a, quote, tale, end quote, of destruction of a prehistoric super civilization evolve the idea that such an event divided all languages of mankind? And if not a tale, how could a real event like this have happened? It must be remembered that the earliest languages we know of, all dating to around 3100 BC, even when spoken by peoples in adjacent lands, seemed to pop out of nowhere. Sumerian, Babylonian, Elamite, pockets of Sanskrit in South America, and so on, many of which have absolutely no affinity with the other. Similarly, today we have been confronted by mysterious moments wherein people have suddenly spoken languages they were never taught, or dialects so old, experienced scholars had to be called in to decipher what was said. While some try and explain this as supernatural or, quote, reincarnation, end quote, it overlooks a far more acceptable answer that fits into a more understandable framework. Pursuing this angle also uncovers one of the most intriguing proofs that such a legend of language creation was inspired by a real cataclysm capable of deranging the electromagnetic frequencies of the Earth. In his articles and books on electromagnetic field effects, Albert Budden has drawn our attention to the wide array of poltergeist effects on physical matter, such as mirrors breaking, tables overturning, and non-flammables exploding, but perhaps of its effects on electrical equipment and computers indicate a certain potential on the human brain, itself a similar though vastly more complex electrical device. He describes how, quote, television sets switch themselves on and off. Repeated telephone connections are made, which engineers consider, quote, impossible, end quote. And computers show programs that have not been installed by anyone or information that is inaccessible through normal use, end quote. We're going to look up Albert Budden. In developing its electromagnetic pollution theory, or his electromagnetic pollution theory, Budden has become convinced that poltergeist phenomena can be explained by electromagnetic aberrations. Identical phenomena have been created around power poles that mimic those reported throughout medieval history that were then attributed to noisy ghosts. Quote, poltergeists, end quote, according to German priests. They apparently have been occurring randomly, and in parentheses it says as far as we understand today, end parentheses, for hundreds of years. One can assume such a phenomenon is a mild upset of the magnetic field in a local place, though what causes the aberration remains mostly unexplained. At the very least, anyway, it seems that electromagnetic aberrations can cause almost anything in any device subject to their effects, including the implanting of information not personally experienced and altering the reception of information. The aberrant fields might engineer this effect by warping other wavelengths with which they come into contact. Especially of interest here are extremely low frequency, or ELF, electromagnetic waves and fields. Physicist Thomas Vallone, director of Integrity Research Institute in Washington, D.C., notes that the alpha rhythm of the human brain is the same frequency as the Schumann frequency, the Earth's fundamental resonant frequency. In parentheses, it says, taking the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, and dividing it by the median circumference of the Earth equals 7.8 hertz, the brain's alpha rhythm. End parentheses. On the amazing potential of all of this, Vallone further comments, quote, in fact, Dr. Robert Wecker, in The Body Electric, I guess it's a book, cites an experiment conducted by the Max Planck Institute in Germany, in which Dr. Rutger Wever found that after totally desynchronizing subjects' biorhythms, and in parentheses it says metabolic and circadian, end parentheses, the introduction of a weak 10 hertz field, or 2.5 volts per minute, I don't know if that's an abbreviation for minute. It might be meters. I don't know. Quote, dramatically restored normal patterns to Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. Yeah, my computer booted. My computer just shut down. I don't know what happened. I'm trying to get the video back. Hold on. Man, that sucks. Alright, you can hear me now though, right? You just can't see me. Man, I really don't want to do this without showing my face here. Yeah, the webcam didn't connect for some reason. If I can't figure it out in the next 2-3 minutes, I'm just going to keep going. That's never happened before. Alright, cool. Thank you, Lerny. Yeah, I'm not sure how I can get my webcam back up without restarting OBS again. I don't want to jump out of the stream. Yeah, I don't know how it just didn't end the whole thing altogether. That's bizarre. Alright, we might have to just keep going without me showing my face here. Because I don't want to do this over again. Alright. Okay. I guess I'm just gonna keep going. I really don't want to I don't know how I was able to keep streaming even though everything just shut down. But now I don't have video. Alright. Let me try something really quick. I apologize if this stream ends. Hopefully it'll keep going. All right. I believe we are good now. I didn't know I could do that, by the way. So I can completely exit OBS and then come back in. Alright, let's continue. Yeah, the computer just shut down and then the video wasn't showing anymore. I'm not sure where it cut me off, so I'll start again at the top of page 174. Especially of interest here are extremely low frequency, or ELF, electromagnetic waves and fields. Physicist Thomas Vallone, director of the Integrity Research Institute in Washington, D.C., notes that the alpha rhythm of the human brain is the same frequency as the Schumann frequency, the Earth's fundamental resonant frequency. In parentheses, taking the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, and dividing it by the median circumference of the Earth equals 7.8 hertz, the brain's alpha rhythm. End parentheses. On the amazing potential of all of this, Vallone further comments, quote, in fact, Dr. Robert Wecker in The Body Electric, and I believe The Body Electric it's some publication, cites an experiment conducted by the Max Planck Institute in Germany, in which Dr. Rutger Wever found that after totally desynchronizing subjects' biorhythms, in parentheses, metabolic and circadian, end parentheses, the introduction of a weak 10 hertz field, and it's 2.5 volts /m, quote, dramatically restored normal patterns to most of the biological measurements. Wever concluded that this frequency in the micropulsations of the Earth's electromagnetic field was the prime timer of biocycles, end quote. Another study done by an Indian biophysicist, Sarada Subramaniam showed that humans' EEG not only responds to the Earth's micropulsations, but also depends on the direction in which they are facing in relation to the Earth's field. That's the end of the excerpt. Yeah, Lerny, everything seems to be sorted here. Can hear me, can see me. It's all good. These dramatic examples of the intricate connection between the human bioprocesses and the Earth's electromagnetic frequencies show us the potential effect of global cataclysm like massive impacts and a rending continent could have on the human brain. In some cases, people can even be, quote, allergic, end quote, or, quote, hypersensitive, end quote, to certain forms of electromagnetism or its, quote, pollution, end quote, while others can withstand varying degrees of it, some to the point that they seem quite immune. This may have been a key factor in how various languages could be created out of one, although it may also depend somewhat on the geographic location where the persons were in the world when the cataclysm struck. With so much evidence pointing to the general possibility of the key points to these legends of a prehistoric destruction, it seems logical to assume that an advanced one-world civilization, a very specific and integral part of these worldwide legends of destruction, could also have existed and been destroyed by this event and by the cumulative action of a geologic aftermath during the centuries following. While this prehistoric civilization's capabilities are only hinted at vaguely in our own legends, Edgar Cayce was the only one to get specific on details of its supposed science, and furthermore claimed the Bahamas was its last intact remnant. This is one of the most astounding assertions made in the Cayce records. While most anybody could fabricate a super civilization from the legends, no one could fabricate its last remnant on the Bahama banks, as Cayce proposed, albeit via a highly unorthodox method. Nor would anybody else have the guts to assert that obscure Bimini held archaeological evidence for this civilization. Along with this disturbing coincidence, come others. In his revelation of the final exodus from the Bahama banks, Cayce asserted that part of this exodus was accomplished using their advanced power sources one final time to, quote, guide the ships in the sea and in the air, end quote, to Peru, Egypt, Spain, among others, and lastly, Yucatan. Although all the old world civilizations seem surprisingly to appear around 3100 BC, in America, the Mayan civilization, like all others of Mexico, seem to have no architectural roots older than 1500 BC. This disparity might be answered by the Mayan calendar, which maintains a beginning date equivalent to our 3114 BC, another echo of time of Peleg and Atyantica. But there is no question that Amerindian cities, as we know them, do not go back that far in Mesoamerica. Reports made from aerial surveys may contain a clue. These repeatedly refer to evidence of sunken cities on the expansive and shallow Yucatan continental shelf, much like those at the Great Bahama Bank. These may represent cities inundated just prior to the Amerindian retreat to higher ground to build the cities of which we now know. Mayan oral histories assert that early Mayans first came from a great land across the eastern sea, or a land, quote, to the rising sun, end quote, that sank beneath the waves, implying a land beyond the Gulf of Mexico, toward the Great Bahama Bank. An older civilization destroyed is recalled as Aztlan, or it's spelled Aztlan, or Atlan, reminiscent again of Atyantica, Atlantis, and Great Upheaval. The Yucatan is, of course, the oldest civilized area of Mexico. In Honduras, at the Mayan ruins of Copan, the Athens of the Mayans, there is a famous mural showing a stylized retreat from volcanoes erupting from under the sea, men fleeing in canoes, and temples crashing and falling into the ocean. Whether this recalls inundations of the alleged Yucatan cities, or those of the Great Bahama Bank, or the prehistoric destruction of a civilization by the splitting apart of the megacontinent, or a mixture of them all. The mural also shows in stylized form a strange flying object with landing gear. This is neither a stylized bird nor a cloud, as the mural commendably portrays realistic fish in the sea and the billowing smoke of volcanoes. Cassian assertions about the last evacuation from Poseidia could scarcely be justified only by these artistic inferences. Nevertheless, Cassian overtones of a previous civilization, or, quote, mighty men, end quote, influencing the beginning of our civilization, are not found or inferred only in the artwork or legends of the Maya, but in almost every early tribe or race. Exactly what degree of advancement these references imply has often been the subject or victim of contemporary and later interpretations, as in the mural at Copan. The Egyptians maintained that before them there was the, quote, reign of the gods, Reign, end quote, from whom they received their knowledge of civilization passed down from a silver dish or saucer. This last interference may have come about to symbolically convey, quote, gift, end quote, from a higher source. But it is also common to all these cultures to recall perhaps fancifully flying machines, and that the last known uses of these were for evacuation, before their knowledge was eventually restricted to the rulers and then lost. The Babylonian Hekatha, or Hakatha. In parentheses, it says laws. In parentheses, possibly derived from early Sumeria, states unambiguously, quote, the privilege of operating a flying machine is great. The knowledge of flight is among the most ancient of our inheritances. A gift from, quote, those from upon high, end quote. We received it from them as a means of saving many lives, end quote. The ancient Chaldean work, Sifrala, even becomes technical, mentioning words that can be translated only as, quote, graphite rod, end quote. Quote, copper coils, end quote. Quote, crystal indicator, end quote. And, quote, vibrating spheres, end quote. And other indications of some form of novel power so suggestive of Casey's Atlantis. A reevaluation of these legends is not being inspired by Casean concepts, which are, on the whole, anathema to standard scientific inquiry. It is in the study of mankind's first cities that we are finding what can only be catalogued as a leftover science, though our timetables allow for no civilization having preceded them. This revelation is especially productive in Peru, far removed from the torrent of Middle East and Mediterranean civilizations, from which much has been lost through the plunder and obliteration of countless wars and famines and superstition. Peruvian legends likewise refer to the earliest arrivals as, quote, coming down, end quote, to build the first great city, Tiahuanaco, in circumstances suggesting evacuation in the aftermath of continental upheaval. The Inca regarded the city's original inhabitants as a, quote, divine, end quote, people, and called them the Viracochas, after the creator god Viracocha, who first, quote, descended, end quote, to create Tiahuanaco, quote, after the receding of chaotic floodwaters, end quote. Hey, Beyond the Box, good to see you here. Whether Viracocha was a composite of the abilities of this, quote, divine, end quote, people or their original leader, it is interesting to note in this regard that some of his unusual appellations, Appellation, sounds like Appalachians, like the mountains, include, quote, Lord Creator of the world, end quote, and interestingly, quote, Old Man of the Sky, end quote. We got some photographs here. Tiahuanaco's extent, easily seen in aerial surveys, is revealing it to be a riddle of incredible engineering. It is no longer believed to have ever been a ceremonial capital of relatively few priests and kings, as previously thought, but a thriving culture with an estimated population of 350,000 or more. The choice of the 12,500-foot altitude to build Tiahuanaco may reflect a desire to be as far from the ocean as possible, and it had to have been built by a people with the pre-science to adjust crops in order to support such a culture at this height, far better than the modern farmers can accomplish today. How these people arrived is a further mystery, since all the earliest cultures of Peru, as we understand them by the ruins they have left behind, began in the Andes. Yet migrants do not land on the coast or migrate into plains and then forsake the convenience of rivers and fields to straight away march up a mountain into the thin air of 12,500 feet. Alright, so we have some images to show here. First is part of the glyph from Copan, Honduras. Copan flourished in the 7th century AD. The Maya are a product of a long line of Amerindian civilizations going back to the mysterious Olmecs, that's spelled Olmecs, around 1500 BC. They, in turn, flourished 1,600 years after the Amerindian calendar begins. Whatever this glyph recalls, it must be older than the 2nd millennium BC. The most fantastic elements of a prehistoric destruction may have been stylistically retained, in parentheses, though improperly understood, end parentheses. An unusual object is floating above the Mayan's head. Alright. And on the other page here it says, despite the appearance of the Mayans and later stylized artwork showing them retreating from sinking cities, the earliest inhabitants of the Yucatan, as in this slate relief from the Teutonic culture, Veracruz, were very non-Mayan bearded men with unusual headdresses. Evidence for this early Indo-Aryan race is found throughout the Americas. You know, I'll show the other 3 photos here since they're on the page. Might as well just show them now. So, first one here. The quote, divine race, end quote, of Viracochas is hardly myth. They appear in the oldest Peruvian artwork found. This human form vessel from the Moche culture, about 100 BC, shows a Viracocha flute player. The Viracochas, who wore long white robes and clothes similar to those of the Sumerians, were also noted for their light skin, auburn or strawberry blonde hair, and weights placed in their earlobes to strengthen them. And next we have the Incas insisted that the Viracochas built Tiahuanaco and Sacsayhuaman at the earliest of times by burning stone until it was as light as cork, and then applying a liquid to the edges to soften it so that polygonal stones fit perfectly into place. This is an example of the joins between 200-ton blocks at Tiahuanaco. Hold on, did he just explain away how they built these? The Incas insisted that the Viracochas built Tiahuanaco and Sacsayhuaman at the earliest of times by burning stone until it was as light as cork, and then applying a liquid to the edges to soften it so that polygonal stones fit perfectly into place. So how come we never hear that explanation anymore? Out of all these megalithic places, never heard about stones being burned until they were light. And then a liquid to the edges. What kind of liquid? And then finally on this page we have the 10-ton gate of the sun at Tiahuanaco, one of its many mysterious buildings. And if you've looked at any megalithic structure videos, I'm sure you've seen this one around at some point. While the references to flying machines, evacuation, and so forth can be variously interpreted, Tiahuanaco represents tangible mysteries of construction, especially considering that its monumental megalithic blocks are often 200 tons or more, placed in perfect polygonal joins so that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them, a considerable feat anywhere, much less at almost 2.5 miles altitude. A pervasive paradox exists throughout all our earliest civilizations. The excavations of the Indus cities, spelled Indus, and those of the earliest Mesopotamia, both of which were founded around 3100 BC, reveal these, the oldest cultures we accept, had the marks of a higher civilization than those that followed, in parentheses, until modern times, end parentheses. For organization and layout, cleanliness, and convenience, these earliest cities were designed to accommodate up to 50,000 people. Mohenjo-daro, along the Indus, was built on a grid with broad avenues bisected at right angles by smaller lanes. An advanced sewer system superior to any in Europe only 200 years ago ran under the streets. Manhole covers were made of brick with holes in them to allow for inspection. This is 5,000 years ago when they were using the same technology. A drain led from each home. There were bathrooms, toilets, subterranean aqueducts with corbelled arches, and a central pool. These conveniences can be extended to Tiahuanaco, or Ur of the Chaldees, and that's spelled U-R, and even Machu Picchu, where water was somehow pumped up 2,000 feet to supply running water. Indications of advanced science and even the use of electricity continue to be found from periods formerly reserved for, quote, cavemen, end quote. A skull discovered in Arabia, believed to date to 6,000 years ago, had been operated on. Examination proved that delicate brain surgery was performed after an herbal anesthetic was used. Bone regrowth indicated that the patient lived another 2 years. Under close scrutiny, the teeth of a skull found in Pakistan near the Indus have upset our views of prehistory. The skull, also about 6,000 years old, has revealed under microscopic examination the results of advanced dentistry. Molars contain drilled holes lined inside with connective grooves, telltale signs of drill bits. And with this, the implications of the use of magnifying mirrors. It is inconceivable that any force other than electrical could have been used to create these perfect concentric holes in such a small working area as the human mouth. We are equally at a loss to explain any known ancient technology that could have formed such precise, minute drills in the first place, plus the ball-bearing science required for their rotary function. These discoveries, along with their implication of still more, quote, modern, end quote, scientific knowledge behind them, are hardly freaks. Nor are they limited to Pakistan. The earliest Peruvian cultures excelled in brain surgery, and they left admirable examples of what must be electroplating, an art, it is believed, the Egyptians also mastered. So there's like a sketch of a tooth here. And I believe it's just showing the precision hole markings on what would have been found there. There's no caption on it, so I'm not sure. It's just a reference. Although these are tangible evidence for inferring an ancient knowledge of some form of electrical power, none of them prove it beyond a doubt without the presence of a machine or instruments that created the power. Casey was not alone in the 1930s, of course, in his belief that there was a prehistoric super civilization. But he is the only one ever to have insisted that a machine capable of producing a form of electrical energy would be found near Bimini, foretelling in a strange way unknown ruins and the epicenter of unexplained electromagnetic phenomena in the Bermuda Triangle. If only Casey had never mentioned Bimini, it would be easy to deal the occult out of the world of investigating very tangible things like boats and airplanes. When approaching Casey's other comments about this civilization, one is faced with some that are so fantastic they could hardly be real. Yet at the same time, the Bimini prediction haunts one to wonder if they too have any merit. Dealing with the validity of Casey's prophecies has proven difficult even for his followers. The most objective view of his Atlantis readings may still come from no less than his son, Hugh Lynn Casey, who after his father's death headed the Association for Research and Enlightenment, or ARE, which Casey had founded. He observed, quote, "They are the most fantastic, the most bizarre, and the most impossible information in the Edgar Casey files. If his unconscious fabricated this material or wove it together from existing legends and writings, we believe that it is the most amazing example of a telepathic clairvoyant scanning of existing legends or stories in print, or of the minds of persons dealing with the Atlantis theory. End quote. In struggling with an assessment of his father's overall psychic contributions, he further added, quote, "Life would be simpler if Edgar Cayce had never mentioned Atlantis." End quote. There is, of course, great influence from Ignatius Donnelly's hallmark book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, published in 1882. 1882. All right. It's by Ignatius Donnelly. I'm going to see if I can find that one. Published in 1882 through Donnelly, writing before the Air Age, was sans the super-civilization aspect so dominant in Caycean readings. Cayce's dependence on the Platonic legend of an island or continent in the middle of the Atlantic is another case in point, one now completely disproved by studies of megacontinent via ocean bottom mapping of the continental shelves. Then again, he deferred to Plato's date of 11,400 years ago, which seems to be a purely Platonic fabrication. Cayce even incorporated the, quote, land of Oz, end quote, into Atlantis. Other Caycean prophecies concerning Atlantis and future inundations have miserably failed, such as Japan and California falling into the ocean in 1998, to name only one. Cayce himself expressed puzzlement at his own Atlantis readings. On one occasion, after glancing at a transcription of what he had said, he remarked, quote, "I wonder where that came from, and if there is anything to it." End quote. Whether Cayce was really seeing the incremental destruction of a past super civilization, or was merely inspired by ancient tales of destruction and popular contemporary theories, some of his adherents hold that the truth lies somewhere in between. They contend that knowledge of the ancient tales might have influenced some of Cayce's interpretations of what he was actually seeing. After all, he was not a geologist, and therefore, already knowing the stories of Atlantis, as we all do, he assumed what he was seeing was the, quote, fabled continent, end quote, breaking up and sinking into the Atlantic. In this context, it is noteworthy that in a 1938 reading covering the initial breakup, he declared that Atlantis split into 5, quote, islands, end quote, which, in essence, the megacontinent has. The 5 continents on the Earth today. But taking Cayce's failures into account, is there really any reason for a serious student of prehistory to credit his successes as more than coincidence or Procrustean interpretations after the fact? It would seem to be more than ridiculous to use Cayce's trances as a basis to postulate the theory that these ancient power complexes may still be functioning and causing ships and planes to vanish or disintegrate into the Bermuda Triangle. It is, however, in an uncanny discovery that more than coincidence is drawn between Caesian power crystals, a civilization of prehistory, and the Bermuda Triangle. The theory that ruined, quote, Atlantean, end quote, power complexes were once... The theory that ruined Atlantean power complexes were once built in the Bermuda Triangle and may still be functioning today has taken an unexpected twist from the possibility that some of these may have been seen on land and apparently still functioning. This was not in the Bermuda Triangle, but deep in the jungles of Brazil, in its Mato Grosso region. Legends have persisted here since the first Spanish and Portuguese explorers arrived in South America of a prehistoric civilization tumbled down and overgrown. Detailed descriptions of these ancient cities, furthermore, have been made by native Indians unfamiliar with any Caesian readings or any advanced science, and relayed to a Westerner before Edgar Cayce began his trances and not published until 1950, after Cayce's death. Yet they share a remarkable identity with what Cayce was recording about Atlantis thousands of miles away in Virginia Beach. The very year Cayce began to give readings on Atlantis, 1924, Colonel Percy Fawcett made worldwide news when he announced that he was journeying into the Mato Grosso to search for what he believed were the only clues left of a civilization of prehistory. Fawcett was led to this belief by the knowledge that he had accumulated over the previous 20 years, 1905 to 1924, of surveying and exploring South America to determine boundary lines. And he also has a book that's mentioned here. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow, Lerny. I should be going live in the morning on Sunday. And that's awesome, Beyond the Box. I hope you spent some quality time with your dad there. That's cool. We got about 5.5 pages left here. Yeah. And one more overhead map. You know what? I'll actually show that right now. The actual continental shelf around the Caribbean before ocean levels rose, possibly after the continent split. A land bridge connected to the shelf with South America. Some believe that a civilization rebuilding after the splitting of the megacontinent could have thrived along the Bahama Bank and into Brazil for centuries before being inundated here and choked out in Brazil by jungles. Okay, so this author's name is Colonel Percy Fawcett. In his Lost Trails, Lost Cities, which is published posthumously, Fawcett referred to the uniformity of South American legends, describing what is now a familiar event. The Andes mountain range violently uplifting, inland seas draining, great portions of land splitting, with portions rising and later sinking, and great buildings tumbling down and being devoured by subsequent jungle growth. Fawcett also noted that the seabed sediment between South America and the Galapagos Islands is full of tree trunks. Consistent with a great deforestation by tidal waves sweeping over land as the South American continent catastrophically smashed into the Pacific, ripping trees back into the Pacific, forming great log mats that eventually sank to the bottom into the sedimentation, as we have seen in Spirit Lake, Washington, and in North Dakota. Fawcett's evidence for an advanced civilization in Brazil goes impressively beyond native legends when what they describe is reconciled with the Casey records. These lost cities are described as having pyramids, rectilinear street plans, and in one case a great temple with a huge rock crystal cut into a disc. Although Hollywood-esque recreations of Casey's Atlantis show pyramids with great crystals atop them, Casey in fact associated these with temples, as did the Brazilian Indians. An unexpected correlation with the Casean power columns for centralizing energy between the crystal's generating source is found when a near-savage Indian captured and shown the splendors of a Spanish church in Peru remarked that it was nothing compared to a ruined city deep in the jungle, where the great halls were lit by a single column of brilliant crystal, or glass. Fawcett's belief that these Indians' tales were indeed referencing some unique forms of energy was reinforced by his first-hand examination of some of the most ancient dwellings in Colombia. He wrote, quote, "They were windowless houses with narrow entrances, their interiors free from the grime of every cooking or illuminating agency known to us, except electricity." End quote. So he's saying they had electric. Fawcett was not a dreamer, nor was he a fool. He had been a colonel in the British Army and is responsible for fixing many of the national boundary lines in western South America that are still recognized today. He was so sure the, quote, lost cities, end quote, existed, that he sacrificed his life to locate them. Before he left on his final expedition, from which he, his son Jack, and his friend Raleigh Rimmel never returned, he wrote this, published posthumously for those who might one day follow. Quote, "Whether we get through and emerge again, or leave our bones to rot in there, one thing's certain. The answer to the enigma of ancient South America, and perhaps of the prehistoric world, may be found when those cities are located and opened up to scientific research. The existence of the old cities I do not for a moment doubt. How could I? I myself have seen a portion of one of them, and that is why I observe that it was imperative for me to go again. I have traveled much in places not familiar to other explorers, and the wild Indians have again and again told me of the buildings, the character of the people, and the strange things beyond." End quote. If Edgar Cayce, quote, saw, end quote, remnants of this civilization in reality, or whether he was inspired by knowledge of these stories and our earliest legends, the upshot seems approximately the same. In other words, if the growing evidence suggesting that mankind reached a technically high degree of science in prehistory is correct, then the possibility that advanced power sources were built is even more real, and they are the product of deduction from evidence and not from trances. Considering that we are now developing power sources of limitless duration, it is easier to imagine that a highly technical civilization could have existed in prehistory that perfected power sources capable of harnessing the energy and elements all around us, within rocks, water, even air, that is, protons and electrons, by means of what is now being viewed as vortex compression. By expurgating the Caycean view of this prehistoric civilization, the only difference is an elimination of the Bahamas and Bimini from its discourses. But it is in the eerie fulfillment of his prophecies here that interest in the Caycean view is sustained. This once again reintroduces one of the most fantastic theories for explaining the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. In this case, however, though not entirely made up of what might be termed devoted Cayce followers, or at least those who wholeheartedly feel his readings are without error, they do believe that his psychic wanderings locked onto these power devices because these were naturally the most interesting elements he saw. It is true, of course, that the greatest electromagnetic and undersea phenomena do recur, where Cayce predicted that Atlantean ruins would exist. However, the argument can also be made that this is purely coincidental, although it seems to be yet another coincidence among so many. The quote, white waters, end quote, of the Bahamas also have been used as evidence that Atlantean power sources are still working below. These white flumes are proposed to be, quote, exhaust, end quote, of some sort. Although they have proven to be perfectly natural, and in parentheses, though still mysterious in origin, end parentheses, a rare photo of them taken in 1999 by Lynn Gernon while flying near Andros with her husband Bruce revealed something inexplicable. They were at 6,500 feet altitude, almost precisely where Bruce had experienced the unusual lenticular cloud in 1970. Their attention was drawn to the ocean surface because big blotches of the glowing white waters were venting up and floating on the surface. In the midst of one blotch, which Gurnon estimated covered about 10 acres, there was an almost perfectly circular area of clear water into which the glowing phosphorescence was incapable of intruding. So far, there is no natural explanation that can explain it. More than anything, this phenomenon could be used to argue that there is something below capable of saturating the water in neat column extending from the seafloor to the surface and perhaps beyond, revealed briefly by a natural venting of phosphorescent gas nearby. There seems to be no other source but electromagnetic or radioactive energy capable of repelling the phosphorescence in the white waters, and thus when drifting with the gentle current, they traced the geometric outline of what would otherwise be invisible. A vortex. This adds disturbing confirmation to a discovery by diver and explorer Dr. William Bell in 1957. When investigating the seafloor south of Bimini, he found in 40 feet of water a metal column of sorts, greater in width at its base. Although it was covered with sea growth, after he chipped this away, he saw that beneath was a gray substance. Farther down in the seabed, he uncovered adjoining gear-like constructions about 2 feet in diameter. When he developed his pictures, he noted that the column had an odd glowing aura to it, akin to ionization, that made the energy in the water photographically visible. During this time, and the several months afterward, he experienced bloody noses and other signs of radiation. So that was in Bimini. The building or tower that had housed this column seemed to have collapsed with time or in a catastrophe. Scattered about were thin slabs of some kind of stone, cut to precise, though now weathered, squares. Since Bell believed the column extended downward another 40 feet, these thin slabs with little imagination could conceivably have come from the uppermost part of the edifice or have been used to line the interior walls. Another echo of the non-conductive tiles surrounding the power chamber or domes of Caesian readings, and now our own reactors. But like the existence of the Bimini stones, is all this proof? Supposing the most fantastic theory that these are sunken power complexes doesn't explain disappearances of boats and planes. Casey may have predicted unusual power columns, but he didn't predict that they were working or that they could cause ships and planes to vanish. The so-called followers of his put that together along with a wide array of claims of finding glowing pyramids below and statues holding crystals. If all these claims were fact, one would also expect the jungles of Brazil to have a reputation for mystery similar to that of the Bermuda Triangle. One reason the, quote, green sea, end quote, of the Amazon does not is that the aircraft usually avoid flying over the area, since crashing there means certain death. Percy Fawcett's notes, once again, become a damn nuisance, preventing one from finally slaying the Medusa. He recorded the existence deep within the jungle of ancient stone towers, glowing within. One lone stone sentinel, which lay on the route to the legendary city Fawcett sought, quote, is the terror of the surrounding Indians, as at night it is lighted from door and windows, end quote. The possibilities of a sunken civilization like Atlantis or a lost one in Brazil have enlivened our imaginations for generations, possibly because they imply an intact link with our past. The depths of the Atlantic or the jungles of Brazil are both inaccessible to the ravages of quarrying by later cultures. So one is inspired to believe that the keys to what may have been our prehistoric past lie fallen but preserved here. Edgar Casey's readings continue to keep the question very much alive. In addition, the growing scientific study of what may cause, quote, psychic, end quote, abilities in some people has given interest in Casey's readings a boost in forward momentum. For some time now, instances of, quote, remote viewing, end quote, have been accepted. This psychic ability is thought to be related to the possible existence of superluminal particles called tachyons, which are particles that move so rapidly they constantly exceed the speed of light and therefore are almost impossible for us to detect. No one imagined these might exist in biological life and cause a link between similar species until scientists in the Soviet Union went to great lengths to study the extrasensory perception, or ESP, in plant life. The tests were conducted under the following conditions. They separated the plants by hundreds of miles, placed them in specially designed, sealed-off tanks that shield all frequencies by which the plants might communicate, and then they were connected to polygraphs. Despite these measures, the plants were still able to respond and communicate. When one plant was singed by a cigarette, or even when the technician merely thought of burning it, the plant hundreds of miles away responded. Hey Ivy, good to see you here. We're nearing the end of the chapter for today. I don't know, Brenda, what do you think Susie's going to think of all of this? Talking about the plants. She's going to get mad at me and yell at me. Don't say these things. By the very postulated nature of tachyons, that they exceeded the speed of light, it was theoretically possible that tachyons could penetrate any shielding and therefore might be responsible. Dr. Hal Puthoff of Stanford University, an expert in lasers and in theoretical zero-point energy fluctuations, came to this theory and proposed that beds of algae could be linked with others by lasers to see if one bed's electromagnetic pulse reactions were transmitted along the laser beam to the other bed. Which, sensing these wavelength changes, would react identically. This would tend to substantiate the idea that even faster particles could form a connecting link between humans, far more complex than lasers, and explain some psychic phenomena. In one incident he recalled, Dr. Puthoff invited, through mutual acquaintances, the famous medium Ingo Swann to participate by being placed in a chamber such as the ones the Soviets had surrounded their plants with in their ESP tests. When Swann merely approached the chamber, all the gadgets, indicators, and lights went on and reacted violently. Swann then immediately drew an accurate picture of what the interior of the complex chamber looked like, though he had never seen it, and the chamber had never been photographed, or the classified descriptions of it circulated in any published form. After being shown disturbing information that the CIA had obtained on Soviet psychic spies, quote, remote viewing, end quote, of the United States, Dr. Puthoff agreed to head the U.S. counter remote viewing program, selecting sensitive people to counter spy with no other means than their minds. According to some published accounts, the U.S. psychic spies were able to roam the Soviet Union in every dimension of the 3 planes of space we occupy, as well as the 4th of time. The results of this data, obtained over Puthoff's 15-year tenure, are still highly classified. Within the supporters of this method, it is noted that to yield the best, or at least statistically acceptable data, several psychics have to be employed on the same subject at once, and that the distilling of their results composes a far more accurate mosaic. To them, since Casey engaged in his trances alone, the margin of error through infiltration from his personal beliefs is much higher. Therefore, elements of Casey's readings may be reliable, but those that tend to repeat themselves, like the continued references to power sources, may be the most reliable. Naturally, interest in Casey's readings of Atlantis is now concentrated on his descriptions of these fabulous power devices, receiving even greater impetus from the discovery recently by our generation of the possible source of their limitless power, which was so difficult for him to convey: zero-point energy. If Casey's power sources are a complete mental myth, they are no longer impossibilities. They are, as found in a reading from 1939, predating any use of nuclear or atomic power, as potentially real for the near future, as Casey's prescient warning for that future. Quote, influences of atomic energies or electrical force of any nature become a channel for good or bad today. End quote. A similar warning is shared in common by our earliest legends. that this great civilization went too far to begin with, and the great meteors, asteroids, or comets that may have destroyed it by instigating great Atyantica were its final judgment. In our own tradition, we find Babalu, or, quote, Gate of the Gods, end quote, Babel, destroyed because of its hauteur, encapsulated in its attempt to reach or command the heavens. In the biblical narrative, God does not dismiss what the unity of Babel can do, but rather says, quote, and now this they begin to do, and now nothing shall be restrained from them, which they imagine to do, end quote. Not exactly the comment the Almighty would make for primitive men putting mud bricks together, nor is that a sin worthy of its destruction by division, scattering, and confusion, and that their speech should be made strange. It reminds us rather of what Victor Schauberger entered into his diary after gazing into the vacuum of zero-point energy. Quote, I stand face to face with the apparent void. The compression of dematerialization that we are wont to call a vacuum. I'm sorry. Having a little difficulty here reading this. I can now see that we are able to create anything we wish for ourselves out of this nothing. End quote. Just how far a prehistoric civilization could have been capable of going before its destruction may be obscured by a cataclysm on Earth, but its evidence might strangely still be held in the heavens. A civilization consumed with the heavens may have directed itself there, as we are today. All our great discoveries of the, quote, enlightened age, end quote, have been upstaged. We now know we were not the first to the Americas. We were not the first with the gear system or with astronavigation. We were not the first with the battery, and perhaps with aerodynamics. Because of the Bermuda Triangle, we may discover we were not the first into space, a proposition that may launch us into the most chilling theory to explain the entire mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. And that's the end of Chapter 8. Now, Chapter 9 is titled The Warnings of Lunar and Martian Anomalies. I think this will be equally as fascinating. Awesome, and we'll have more photographs to look at next week, too. Like the face on Mars and all that stuff. So, I do have some Edgar Cayce books I want to look into. I have some here in my library, but I also would like to pick up a few others by him. But, yeah, he studied ESP. And there's a lot more to all of that. I have several other books that cover that topic, so that's going to be That's going to be a brain scrambler for sure. Hey Jay, good to see you here. Hey, no problem, Jay. It's all good here. It's been real busy and hectic on my end here as well. Like, I didn't do a show for Bermuda Triangle for a few weeks here. But I was trying to get everything organized and sorted out on my end. And thankfully, we all made it here tonight. I couldn't do it Thursday either. I was like, no, I'm not going to put the show off for another week. So that's why we're doing this tonight. But, yeah, thanks for being here, everyone. I appreciate it. And I'll be getting that members-only content up soon for you. I'm sorry. It's just the way this has all been going. I've been restructuring everything. The website's all up and running. So you can go to yissilmissilproductions.com or just yissilmissil.com. And you'll find at the top a banner that has 4 buttons in it for the 4 different video platforms I'm putting everything on now. And I'm going to try to just stream directly to YouTube like I've been. I'll try to reincorporate Rumble again. We were having issues with the stream rate. The bit rate was so low, and it was dropping frames on the YouTube stream a few weeks ago when we were trying that out. So that's why we're back to exclusive YouTube lives. We're not spreading out the internet too far here with everything. Oh, that's awesome, Jay. And hey, Andreas, good to see you here. Yeah, so I'm planning on going live tomorrow in the morning. So I'll be here at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And I'll try to keep it short tomorrow. I really will. And in that same vein, we're just about to hit 2 hours. But I'll stay here a few more minutes with you guys. I think it's funny. YouTube is like having everyone show up right at the end of the show. But, man, we're talking about crystals lighting hallways. Brazil having ancient power stations that people practically died trying to discover and document. I think it's pretty clear we had civilizations that are now submerged in the ocean floor. The only question is, how recent was it? I think it was a lot more recent, like what this book has been saying. Just several thousand years. Awesome, Jay. Thank you, man. You know, I was saying earlier, I mapped out part 2. Like, this book has a part 2. So this is from 2004. I believe I keep on getting that wrong all the time. I'm sure that... No, that's right. 2004. And then the second one is 2017. I scheduled every show using the next book. That's how far in advance I booked them. So I'm just trying to make sure I have everything mapped out for the year. And it's probably going to change a little bit from week to week. But I do plan on doing these deep dives and the Tuesday Coral Castle deep dives for the foreseeable future. We'll be getting a lot of those out. And that's just because there's so much content to cover. A lot of the time the Coral Castle shows go between an hour, hour and a half. But these Bermuda Triangle shows are knocking out 2 hours every time we go live. So I'm trying to just keep it within that time frame, because these chapters are fairly long. I mean, we're talking about 20 pages per chapter, roughly. At least we're getting through it, though. You can see the progress we got on it. So like we're getting close to the end here, but not the end of the content. That's for sure. Because I think there's a few more gems in this book. But it's like I'm taking notes on things that stand out. And I've been rewriting my notes on Coral Castle, and I actually have these ones here from the past several weeks from Bermuda Triangle. I'll have to consolidate. But yeah, it's been a hectic past few weeks for sure. But I'm appreciative of all you being here in spirit or here physically live or watching after the fact, just thinking of me. Like, thank you. I appreciated it. And I enjoy being here, sitting here with you. But yeah, tomorrow I'll be live, and then we'll figure out when the next one. Like, I'm not doing Let's Talks every single Sunday anymore. Only if they're necessary. And I'll have some stuff to share tomorrow. It's you know how that show goes. Cool. And we're pretty much caught up. I got like a 15-20 second delay on the live, so it's not going to cut anything out. Yeah, with the restreaming, it kind of delayed the last Let's Talk stream. Or something happened where it just completely cut off the ending. But I fixed that in the re-upload. But yeah, that's about all I got to share on that front. I'm making posts on my Substack because I continually get more subscribers over there lately because of Gregory Manarino referring my channel to everyone. We got about 30 followers over on Substack, so I'm trying to put out posts the day of lives saying like, here, I'm going to be going live at this time, here's the link. But I might just end up doing like weekly posts like for the week of, and then show like what shows I'm doing and links to go watch those live. But yeah, I'm out over on Substack. I need to update TikTok. Everything else is updated though, except Brighteon. Brighteon has too many ads to even embed on my website. Hey, Jason H., good to see you here. Oh, this is good. It's a nice little gathering for the end of the show here. You know, I haven't even been over on Abe's channel in a few weeks. I've jumped in and watched a few portions of his shows, but my sleep schedule's been completely different these past several weeks. So I'm not up all night half the week anymore. But yeah, it's good to have you here and listening to me read this out loud. And I like having a little hangout afterward. What are we at? We're a little over 2 hours. So we did good today. If I don't know, when I put this show up for the re-upload, I'll make sure it's all tight and everything. But the computer shut down while I was live, and I'm surprised I was even able to get the same stream going again. So at least we were able to stay all on the same stream. But it did end up going silent for a little bit, and then I ended up having an issue with the webcam. So I had to close out of the program a second time, was able to log back on and go on the same live. So I'm glad YouTube has a little buffer zone of, I think, like 10 or 15 minutes. It's been years since I've thought about that. But yeah, that'll do it for today. And next week we'll be hitting chapter 9. Again, another 20 pages here. So look forward to another 2-hour show. We'll go back to doing this on Thursday. This was just because I couldn't make it happen this past Thursday. So tomorrow, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Be here for Let's Talk About It. And until the next one, class dismissed.